Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Wolverine Caucus. We always like to say that the Wolverine Caucus helps to change and better the world one forum at a time. And our forums are supported and produced by the UM Alumni Association and by the Office of Vice President for Government Relations. We are excited that you are here today to talk about a very important issue that's facing our state, that's facing our nation, and Flint has become kind of a point for all that is going on with water systems, not just in Flint, but in a lot of places. So we have some of the best speakers here today who are actually helping in Flint to make this better, both faculty from the University of Michigan. And to introduce them, we have State Representative Jeff Irwin from the great city of Ann Arbor. Go Blue. And without further ado, please.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Go Blue, and welcome. Let's do Go Blue, yeah. There's a couple of tentative clappers there. It's always easy to clap with the University of Michigan. Really happy to be here today. Obviously, it's always an honor to represent Ann Arbor, but particularly when we can introduce to you a couple of great speakers who are going to be filling out this Getting the Lead Out forum today. I know we're all very interested in learning more about what happened in Flint and what can be done to prevent it in the future. As many of you may know, I was recently appointed to be on the investigatory committee here in the legislature. I'm excited for that committee to start meeting so we can start answering the questions I think that the public deserves to answer, particularly the Flint families deserve to have answered. But without further ado, I want to introduce our two speakers for this morning. One is Dr. Martin Kaufman. He is the David M. French Professor of Earth Science at the University of Michigan, and he's really been leading the effort to identify where the lead pipes are, identify the infrastructure that's underground, so that the efforts to improve that can be more effective. And also we have Professor Teresa Olson, who is an Associate Professor of Civil and Environmental Engineering, and she's going to be focusing more on the drinking water treatment chemistry and the disinfection side, getting more into the science of what's going on in the pipes. So without further ado, let me introduce Dr. Martin Kaufman and Professor Teresa Olson. Here first? I'm sorry. First we're going to have Dr. Teresa Olson. Thank you.
So can you all hear me? Yeah? Okay, good. I'm going to talk about some of the lessons I think we should learn from the Flint crisis. And I really am pleased to be here today, and I'm honored that you are interested in the message that I want to deliver. I'm going to talk about the lessons that I hope that we can learn from Flint, and talk about what's necessary to protect safe drinking water. Okay. So today I'm going to focus on two topics, primarily the first one, and that is safe potable water. What does it take to produce it? And by looking at these elements of what it takes to produce safe potable water, we're going to find that there are several lessons that we need to learn from the Flint crisis to improve on what we're currently doing. And then lastly, I'm going to focus on water crisis management, and do we need to develop some better strategies? Because unfortunately, we could probably expect, no matter how well we address the former bullet point here, that we still are going to run into crises along the way, and that's because we just can't predict everything. So safe potable water, what does it take to produce? I'm going to talk about 6 different points that I think are things that we need to refocus on and pay attention to in order to answer this question. And the first is that we need the best water supply available. and I'm going to talk a bit more about each of these 6 points. The second is that we need to have multiple barriers to reduce the risk to the water quality or quantity even. And finally, I'd like to also talk about how this principle, which is now being embraced everywhere in the country because it's necessary, how that leads to some lessons that were ignored in Flint. Sound engineering and planning, that's probably not a very big surprise that we need to think about what we didn't do in Flint. Sufficient financial commitment to safe water quality is another aspect, of course, in terms of what it takes to produce safe water. But I want to talk about a couple of important points related to what that's going to take. Qualified operations staff. I have some suggestion about what needs to happen there as well. And trust of consumers is probably maybe a little bit of a surprise to include on this list, maybe to some of you, but you might think that trust of consumers is an end product of providing safe water, but I'm going to argue that it's also a mentality that we have to have in terms of trying to gain the trust of consumers that makes safe water in the first place. So, first of all, the first bullet on that list was about the need to look at the best quality water sources. And rivers and lake water sources are an important source for urban communities in the U.S. About 61% of the population in the U.S. Draws their water, their drinking water, from surface water, what we would call surface water, which are rivers and lake sources. And of these two sources, rivers are the most difficult to try to produce a safe drinking water or potable supply. That's because they have higher fractions of runoff and wastewater discharges than, say, groundwater, and higher concentrations of many of the chemical contaminants and pathogens that are in river water. So for this reason, this is why choosing the highest quality source available helps to minimize the risk. If, for example, there are different surface water sources, we want to choose the one, if it's available to us, that gives us the highest quality to start with, because it's only going to improve from there. And doing this helps to minimize the risk of exposure to chemical contaminants and pathogens. I think the lesson from Flint is that we can't take this principle lightly. One of the things that happened in Flint is, despite the fact that other sources perhaps were there, the highest quality source wasn't chosen. And that's a problem. So this principle is one that we need to take more seriously. And I also want to say on the subject of water source as a means of generating potable water and its importance, is that there are also suggestions now that we need to really bear down on protecting water sources. The Flint River is more corrosive than the Detroit drinking water source. It contains about 8 times the concentration of chloride, which is a chemical that is linked to iron corrosion. And so what are some of the important sources of chloride in runoff? Well, de-icing salt trucks. If we don't pay attention to this, what we can expect is that the chloride levels in all our surface waters will increase. And we're automatically then at risk, more risk, for the kinds of problems that we have with corrosion. So this is something that maybe we should really bear down on and try to look at alternative sources of de-icing materials. Certainly de-icing is important, but without challenging the status quo, what we're going to expect with that is more chloride in our waters. In addition, I want to also make the case that there possibly are other sources that we should be watching out for. Right now, maybe this is the important source, but what about fracking? Fracking requires saline streams that are more saline than seawater. Right? They contain a lot of chloride, a lot of bromide. Just a little bit of that getting into the water supply is problematic. So even if it's 0.01%, it's possibly problematic. So in the future, if we don't look out for our water, we may run into corrosion problems that we never dreamed about. The second bullet point that I wanted to mention in terms of what lessons we need to learn is this notion of the multiple barrier principle. This principle takes all threats into account and makes sure that there are barriers in place to eliminate them or minimize their impact. It essentially looks at selecting the best available source, protecting it from contamination, using effective water treatment, and preventing water quality deterioration in the distribution system. You can see in Flint, almost all of the barriers fell apart. The best available water source wasn't selected. Effective water treatment wasn't selected. They allowed deterioration in the distribution system. And when any of these barriers fall, there's a potential for public health problems. And so what we need to have is a fortress mentality, essentially. That we need to make sure that we adhere to this principle of not putting our eggs all in one basket, relying on effective treatment, for example, and ignoring the fact that we're not using the best available water source. Engineering and planning. An example of how this can go awry and create problems is illustrated by what happened at Flint. Particle removal, which there are processes that are used to remove particles, and that's a very important step in water treatment, involves adding a chemical coagulant known as ferric chloride, which, because of that choice, would elevate the chloride concentration yet further. And so that was definitely not necessarily a good engineering decision. In addition to that, that might have been helped if, for example, corrosion inhibitors were added, but no corrosion inhibitor was added, despite the fact that the Flint water contained corrosion inhibitors. And so corrosion protection requires maintaining the protective corrosion scales that develop in normal pipe walls. And if we don't protect those scale linings, then essentially the pipes corrode and toxic metals, like lead, can leach into the water supply. Unfortunately, no testing. If you're proposing such treatment, it would be incumbent on the utility then to test, make sure that those changes don't ensure the scale integrity. But unfortunately, that wasn't done. And we know the reasons why that wasn't done. It wasn't done because there was a very rushed incentive to get this plant in service. And the lesson is really that we can't do that. We need to healthy respect the engineering and testing process that's normally needed, and it should never be done, no matter what the reason. Because you only have to look at Flint to see what some of the impacts can be. Another bullet point here had to do with the financial end of things. And water is really really undervalued commodity, and the supporting water supply infrastructure is severely underinvested. And yet, water is the lifeblood of the economy. If it stopped, essentially the economy would stop. And every dollar that we spend on infrastructure returns $6 in the economy. And, you know, looking at the stock market recently, that's a good investment. Many of the financial decisions that were made in Flint to underspend were false savings, of course. For example, Flint, it was estimated, would save $140 a day by not adding that corrosion inhibitor. And even if that was doubled, the cost that it's going to incur to correct the problems that have developed are way more than that. So the lesson is that we have to do a better job at properly valuing high-quality water. If we don't do that, we're going to continue to make these mistakes. And you can see from Flint that we just can't afford not to. And I mean afford in the economic sense, really. Qualified operations staff. The best engineered water treatment facility won't be sufficient if you turn it over to operators who are not well trained. And so communities in economic distress are the most likely locations to struggle with maintaining a trained staff. And I think the lesson that I draw from this is that the state needs to improve its level of assistance to such communities so that it can do a better job of providing experts, perhaps, to troubleshoot when any problems arise. And this is yet another suggestion I have in terms of what needs to happen to help communities that find themselves unable to acquire the training that they need. And then the last bullet that I had on that list in terms of what it takes is trust, is ensuring trust. Providing safe potable water is irrelevant if the public won't drink it. And by working to earn their trust, my point is that we increase our odds at achieving safe potable water. For example, telling customers that the water is safe when the testing isn't thorough is a trust buster. And doing only what's minimally required when common sense says otherwise is also a trust buster. And so the lessons from Flint here are that we need to assume that there is a problem until there's no proof that there isn't one. And that we need to satisfy more than just the minimum requirements as a normal approach. So, just to review, I believe that there are lessons related to all 6 of these different ingredients that are part of what it takes to make water safe for all to drink, and that there are lessons that we can take away from this if we're going to prevent this from happening in the future. The second question that I wanted to address is, what are crisis management? Inevitably, as I said, we're never going to be 100% in making sure that water we don't enter into some sort of water crisis in communities, although certainly we need to do a better job. But when it happens, we need to develop better strategies. And if we look at what's been happening recently, there's an increasing use of home point-of-use filters, for example, to deal with water crises. It's happened in Toledo with my system. It's happened in Flint here, and it's happened in a few other places less visibly. It leaves the customer, the problem with this approach is it leaves the consumer with the decisions to maintain and use the treatment device. And the other problem with this is that these POU filters, as I call them, point-of-use filters, are designed for everyday household use. And there have really not been too many studies to show how effective they are if you're trying to use them to treat highly degraded water. So the question that we have is this really the best that we can do? And some of my research was directed at looking at point-of-use filter in terms of how well it does in terms of its everyday use. But since the problem in Flint, we've been now trying to turn some of that research to look at this question in terms of how appropriate it is to use for highly degraded water. So, for example, one of the questions that we had, these point-of-use filters are known to be incubators, for example, of microorganisms. So they take out many chemical contaminants, but they also grow microorganisms. And the reason for that is that a lot of people don't like the taste of chlorine, right? If you're using these filters to take the chlorine out, well, you take the chlorine out and there's nothing to prevent microbial growth. So that's a kind of inherent problem in this one-step treatment. And what we're doing is conducting research to determine how drinking water quality impacts the microorganisms that grow. This is a picture of the manifold system. It's got some 6 point-of-use filters that we were testing in this particular example. So we're extending this research to Flint to look at how effective these filters are in treating highly degraded water. And so the larger question is this a safe water crisis management strategy? So in summary, there are many important lessons from the events in Flint, and if dealt with well, I believe they offer an opportunity for the state of Michigan to take a leadership role even in protecting water security and dealing with crises, as well as developing healthy communities in general. So, thank you.
When Flint switched from the Flint water source to their water source, then it was less clean water source. Is that something that happens regularly around the country, where people switch to less clean water to save money, or is this the first case that happens?
It's not unusual at all. Switching the water source is well, they did two things. They switched the water source to treating their own. They weren't treating their own, they were buying treated water. So that was a big change, and a large challenge to handle the time frames.
So if it turns out that point-of-use filter is not a good strategy for addressing water quality crisis, what is a good strategy that you could do instead?
Well, it might require other forms of treatment. The problem with point-of-use filters is you're one as I mentioned, taking out the disinfectant, you're taking out, and then by doing so, you're creating a good media for microorganisms to grow. There could be maybe stage systems but it would be more complicated. That's what I'm thinking that this is popular or seems convenient to do. And we haven't done any research to show that it's certainly probably lessens the risk. And that's important. So something has to be done. I agree with their approach, frankly, in using these, but decreasing the time over which the design life of the filter is dramatically reduced. I think that's the best approach they could have taken.
Do these residents know that these point-of-use filters are supposed to be going out after techniques, and that it's a higher, also the less risk, but it's also risk to microorganisms?
I don't think that they've been told anything about the microorganisms, but they've been, I believe that everybody who's gotten instructions about the filter has been told to change them in 2 weeks. And that occurred shortly after the EPA decided that the lead capacity in these filters dictated that kind of advice.
Well, I just feel like it's a Flint resident aquifers to use those filters are going to depend on those filters for a long ways, and they're not going to have enough money to buy the filter again because they were given to them by the government for free. So knowing that it's for free, they're going to assume that
I think a continued program to continue to provide these to the residents is absolutely essential, because they cost at least $10 a pop in the Home Depot or wherever you go to buy them, and the tendency for people will be to leave them in longer. Yes.
I understand there's a delicate balance in treating the water so that you have less pathogens and less corrosion. But sometimes aren't they at odds with each other, and were there issues involving that?
Sometimes. Yeah, disinfecting water is always, sometimes there's a narrow window of feasibility. Sometimes there's no window without making some other changes. So. Yes,
Dr. Mona Hanatisha at Hurley Hospital has said that the early problems detected in the Flint River water, the discoloration, the smell, all the things in the spring of like 2014 that were showing up, advice was given to everybody who experienced this kind of water in their home. They said, boil it, disinfect it. And Dr. Hannah Atisha says, ironically, when you do that, she claimed it concentrates the lead in the water, and that actually makes the situation worse. That's what she said. I heard her on the radio. So it sounds to me like you can't win for losing. You try and, make the water look better, smell better, taste better, get the color out, and you concentrate lead, and everybody ends up getting poisoned.
Well, I think when the water looked as it did going out in the distribution system during that period of time, there was no easy solution. It's as I was suggesting, it's probably going to take several solutions to make it, to really reduce the risk. And that's the fact of the matter.
So we're just working through this indefinitely. It's going to take all sorts of time.
To
get rid of all the problems.
Well, there are many strategies underway, and I think my colleague Lauren is going to talk about those.
Maybe the next speaker will address it. Is the real problem only involving drinking water?
No, not necessarily. Legionella, for example, you don't contract that. You don't have to contract Legionnaire's disease so much by drinking or cooking with it, or maybe cooking a little bit more so. But showering, it's more of an airborne. So the mist that you generate in the shower, for example, which has no point of use filter, and Legionella is a good example.
You think that is caused by the lead in the water?
There's some. I'm not saying it is. I know they've had some. There's definitely incidents of Legionnaire's disease, but whether it's attributed to any deterioration in the water, it may not be lead, it might be the iron. But there's some studies that show that Legionella thrives under high iron conditions, for example. Whether that was the case here, it's not been proven. But that's an example of one where it's not just drinking, it's not just cooking, it's exposure via aerosol.
In fracking, natural fracking, and induced fracking, is there any difference in the quality of water, one versus the other?
No, fracking requires using very concentrated aqueous streams that contain a lot of salt, and that's what I was focused on. It contain a lot of other things too, but the salt, for example, if we're worried about where salt might be coming from in the future, I would take a look at any spills or any releases into some of those fracking streams because they're very, very concentrated.
Why did they switch the source of water in Flint?
I don't really understand the distribution issue because it seems like obviously some communities were very hard hit by this and others were not. But I thought they were all under the same water source and the distribution. Is that not true, or is it? How did that happen that some communities didn't seem to have a problem or as big a problem? I'm sorry.
You mean with lead?
With the lead, yeah.
So some of the older. So this is something Marty's going to address.
Oh.
So he's going to show you the distribution of where the lead is, where it needs to be gotten out of. It's not uniform at all in the city. So it has to do with, whether you live in an older neighborhood with the older infrastructure or a newer.
Dr. Caucus? So one more question. So, concerning Legionnaires then, should I be concerned that I am running a humidifier in my home concerning myself and my pets? If this can be airborne, and yes, I'm using the water out of the faucet. Should I just put a dry skin and crack
Legionella is more of a problem in warmer weather, so it's probably not as problematic now. But once the weather warms up, that's when people will start seeing more of it. So, but that if you're using tap water, that could be a factor. I think.
Okay, one more.
So I have two children, and I asked the same question to my doctor about Legionnaires and the humidifier. And I was told by the doctor that it was really spreading in the hospital, and that it wouldn't spread in our shower or humidifier.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Caucus?
I'd like to thank everybody for coming. I'd like to thank the Alumni Association of the University of Michigan for sponsoring this and inviting me. I'm going to talk today about getting lead out and particularly challenges for older cities. As you may have noticed during the last debate we had in Flint with the Democratic candidates, the big point was made that Flint is not the only city that's going to be affected by this type of problem. This is a national problem. Flint is at the bleeding edge of this. We have a lot of problems with our infrastructure in the United States. It's old. It's in many cases decrepit. It's decaying. And it's at the end of its rated life cycle in many respects. So we'll go through that and we'll talk about, what way forward do we have given these challenges for older cities. So I want to talk first about lead as an environmental hazard, just to give a little bit of a background and put it into context. Then we'll talk a little bit about the current status of the United States infrastructure in terms of the pipes, and I'm going to stay with water, but all infrastructure in this country needs a lot of work. We're talking about our bridges, our ports, our airports, etc. And then we'll focus on Flint, and we'll look at water infrastructure in Flint, give you some specifics about how many pipes there are, where the lead pipes are. We'll show you some maps of how we map where the lead service lines are leading into the house. I'll also talk about environmental lead, because I'm going a little off task here. In my opinion, is that while we're getting rid of the lead in the water, it's a good chance to take an initiative to get rid of all the lead in people's homes. It would be a real tragedy if we rehabilitated an entire city by removing the lead service lines, and then children still tested high for lead because there was still lead paint in the homes. So while we're at it, let's get all the lead out. And then I want to talk about something which I call moving from network to networking. Too often we talk about infrastructure in a self-contained type of framework where we talk only about water. And we talk about water systems and water networks. But water is interrelated to energy. And water is interrelated to other things within infrastructure. So as we approach these problems and try to move forward in solving them, we can take advantage of some synergies between different types of infrastructure to help us perhaps solve more than one problem at once. So let's get rolling on that. Okay, so what is lead? Lead is a naturally occurring metal that's present below the surface in many ores. It's typically associated with zinc, copper, and silver. Now, the fact that it's elemental, meaning it's very basic, means it is persistent in the environment. It's a key thing to remember. We come in contact with lead in different mediums, in paint, ceramics, pipes, solder. In this country, lead solder was used until 1986 on indoor plumbing. And that could be a big source of some of the problems that we're still seeing in Flint today with high levels of lead in the test results. Lead was outlawed as an amendment to the Safe Drinking Water Act amendments in 1986. And, the logic of that is that we should get rid of all lead. If we make a lot of outlaw lead, let's get rid of all lead. Gasoline, batteries, and cosmetics. Up until 1978, gasoline in this country had tetraalkyl lead as an anti-knock compound. A lot of atmospheric deposition of lead now exists in many urban areas, especially in highly trafficked areas where there is a lot of vehicular traffic. So we've seen many studies, a lot of studies have been done in New Orleans, other cities, which illustrate sort of a distance decay function that the closer you get to higher trafficked areas, the more lead you see in the soil. This becomes a big problem for children because children go outside in warm weather, they put their hands in the soil and they put their hands in their mouth. And that's a major exposure pathway for lead. Drinking water. We're all too familiar with that in Flint. Lead crystal, lead glazed pottery. And more research now is being conducted that illustrates that lead is resuspended in homes by vacuum cleaners. So lead dust gets trapped in from outside, and the vacuum cleaners resuspend that dust into the atmosphere, into the indoor air, and then people breathe it in. So you have an inhalation pathway now as well, not just a ingestion from drinking. No amount of lead is safe. Over the years, we've lowered our tolerance in terms of our maximum contaminant level for how much lead we will tolerate. Right now, we're at 15 parts per billion in drinking water. Lead creates all kinds of problems, particularly for children, because children absorb lead at a much higher rate than adults do. Decreased mental capacities, lowering of IQ, kidney function problems, reduced fetal growth. That's a real problem for pregnant mothers. And even in adults, we see problems with slow speech and also kidney problems. One of the problems we have in Flint that we haven't really gotten a handle on yet is that every 30 to 50,000 people come into the city to go to school or work who don't live in Flint, but they drink that water for 2 years. And they may have drank it longer than the residents who were, because they didn't know about the contamination perhaps for a little bit longer. So, while 98,000 people got exposed directly in Flint, there's also probably many thousands more people who were exposed to lead over time, that 2-year period. So the United States, the American Society of Civil Engineers has what I call the Infrastructure Olympics. Every 4 years, they put out a report card about America's infrastructure in these 16 different categories. And you can see the drinking water, the fourth on the left, gets a D. In fact, none of America's infrastructure does particularly well. The highest grade is B-. In the United States, we had 3 major periods where pipes were put into the ground. And this corresponds to urban growth patterns in the country roughly. So as cities expand and they grow, we need water distribution networks, we need wastewater pipes to service people at their homes as cities expand and grow. And in the 1880s, the pipes were laid. Some were metal. We even have some old wood pipes. The Detroit system still has some lingering wood pipes carrying water. And their lifespan is anywhere between 90 and 150 years, which means that they're going to start wearing out in 1970 to 2030. In Flint, the period of the 1920s was, between 1920 and 1950 was the fastest growth period of Flint as a community. That's when most of the pipe infrastructure was put into the ground. That has a lifespan of 100 years, which means that in 2020, if we were being real literal, all the pipes would fail. But this is an average. So some pipes are failing earlier, some pipes are going to last a little bit longer. What we're seeing now in Flint is more than 1 major pipe rupture of a main delivering water a day. Last year we had 378 pipe ruptures in Flint. And the last 5 years we've averaged over 300 each year. This is the omen, essentially, for saying we have old infrastructure, it's starting to decay, something needs to be done. Then in the 50s we had another period of growth post-war, and those are expected for replacement around 2025. What about the funding? Are we keeping up with addressing this aging infrastructure, or are we just on the treadmill? Well, we're on the treadmill, but we're falling off the treadmill. Because what's happening is that every year, the blue numbers indicate, the dark blue indicates what's funded on the left side. So in 2011, we funded $20.8 billion worth of infrastructure. This is for water distribution infrastructure, so it's the pipes. But $15.5 billion was unfunded of what the American Society of Civil Engineers estimated was needed. Now, as we notice, going through time, from 2020 to 2040, that gap between what is funded and what is needed is growing. So we're falling behind. In terms of total infrastructure needs in this country, of keeping it current and functioning well, the American Society of Civil Engineers estimates that by 2040 we're going to need $3.6 trillion to keep our infrastructure healthy. So let's take a look at Flint specifically. Current status of the pipes in Flint and from the pre- and post-crisis periods. Now, the crisis started in 2014. We have 600 miles or so of mains. The mains are the pipes that run in the street, that run under the streets. Okay, they're generally about 18 to 24 inches in diameter. Those are typically made out of cast iron. Okay. Some of the cast iron joints, when the two pipes are put together, are called bell and spigot joints. They may contain lead. In the old days, the bell and spigot joint is not a perfect fit. In order to seal it well, you had to pour metal on it to seal it. Sometimes they use molten lead. That could be a slight source of lead contamination also. 80 years is typically the average year lifespan for the average age of remains in Flint. So here's where we get to where we identify the lead. We went to the water department after learning immediately, and I mean immediately, after learning that children were being exposed to lead in Flint. Myself and a couple other members of our Geographic Information System Center called the then Director of Public Works in the City of Flint, Howard Croft, and we offered our services to find where the lead lines were. We went over to the city, to the water department, to get the records, and the records were kept on 45,000 index cards, written in pencil from 1950 to 1980. They were smeared. A lot of the information was missing. You know, we couldn't use them. Now, fortunately, what they had done is they had taken a lot of the information on the cards, they transferred them to parcel maps. You may have seen parcel maps when you pay your taxes. They keep them in a folio, and it's sort of square shaped, and it has an index number of what your parcel number is. And on each parcel, what they did is they coded what type of service line went into the house from the main. So when you have the mains running along the street, and then at right angles running into homes, you have typically 1-inch diameter pipes that provide water service to your house, and hence the name service line. A lot of those pipes are made out of lead. In fact, there's a good chance that if your house was built anywhere in the United States before 1930, you have some type of lead service line coming into your house. Now, why lead? Well, lead lasted longer than cast iron, and it's more malleable, meaning it can be bent easier, and it was easier to work with. Plus, the Lead Industry Association was a very powerful lobby, and they kept pressing for the use of lead to utilities over that time period. So they had they put a code on each parcel ID, on each parcel on these maps. And there's 56,000 parcels in the city of Flint. And those were contained on 240 separate paper maps, which they had scanned into a computer. That's 240 JPEGs, essentially. And you take a picture with your cell phone, you create a JPEG, that's what we had. None of it was referenced to anything, so we had to stitch together all 240 maps and then reference it to a real database so we could transfer the code into a database. And we did it. It took us 3 weeks. So a lot of hiring, a lot of great student support from the University of Michigan, from all campuses. We had people from Dearborn, from Ann Arbor, and from Flint helping us. We had people from the community. We had unemployed people who volunteered their time to work on this. And we got it done. We found that 25,000 of the lines were copper, 11,000 were made of galvanized material, which is steel essentially, or metal coated with zinc. And then we had 13,000 service places of unknown material. So the data clearly are not great, because there's a lot of missing data. And as I mentioned before, we had 378 pipe rushers in last year, in 2015, and about 300 on average from 2011 to present. That's 2.6 times the national rate of pipe rupture. That's very significantly higher. Now, Mark Edwards from Virginia Tech has done quite a bit of work in Flint. Has done some simulations in the laboratory, and he said that his conclusion was that after looking at the corrosion of the pipes, that the average age of Flint's pipes had aged 11.5 years. Now we're already on the edge. They're already breaking at alarming rates. So this additional stress that's been placed on them cannot bode well for the future. So major pipe ruptures continue. Just last Tuesday we had a big pipe rupture that took up the hot water to the whole north side of the plant.
How is the rupture? Cast iron pipe simply fracture?
Yes, it's corrosion, and you know, you get corrosion from inside and outside because soil can create corrosion. From the outside, inside you can have aggressive water, and at a little scale, you have biofilms on the inside of the pipe which can help accelerate corrosion. Improper treatment practices and chemistry can also accelerate corrosion. And then pipes just age over time as well. This is what the service connection looks like. So I'm just going to get right up here. So here's the cross section of the water main in the street. So this is about 24 to 36 inch diameter, or 18 to 24 inch diameter pipe. And running at a right angle toward the house, there's a valve here that many of you will have on your house. It will be painted blue or red sometimes, and it's called curb stop. The water utility has a special wrench that only they have that can turn this off in case there's an emergency in your home and you need the water cut off. And then there's another link that goes right into your house. Now, if you're nervous about your connection, one thing you can do is you can go below the inlet valve on your water meter and scratch it with a key, and also bring a magnet with you. And if it's shiny and metallic, it's galvanized. If it's shiny or dull and not magnetic, then it's lead coming into the house. And it's not only the pipes that might be lead, but the fittings as well. Many people don't know that brass, up until 2014, contains 8% lead. So a lot of lead we're getting in the water in Flint may not only be coming from lead pipes, it may also be coming from brass fittings. A big indicator of where lead is located is related to the age of the structure. As I mentioned before, homes built before 1930 are very suspect for having lead as a surface line intruder. The average age of the housing stock in Flint is 74 years old, 1942. Lead plumbing was outlawed in 1986. We have, as you can tell, it's in small print, but we have over 23,000 homes in Flint built before 1950, and we have over 15,000 built before 1930. Now, there's also what we call premise plumbing. Premise plumbing refers to that part of the service connection that the city is not responsible for, from the curb box into the house, and then all of the pipes in your home and fixtures. So your water faucets, your plumbing risers that go up to the second floor, the copper pipes you might have, the solder you have on those pipes, that's what's called your premise plumbing in the trade. Sometimes there's solder that was used before 1986 to seal those pipes and prevent leaks. That contained lead that was put in before 1986. Corrosive water, you take that solder and dissolve it, and then you're drinking it. Another thing that's not well known is that a lot of people have electrical devices that are grounded to their water lines. That can also cause accelerated corrosion. That's a bigger problem in industrial buildings and commercial buildings, but many people have water pumps associated with wells that have their grounds to their well, and the wells also have lead fittings that they were built before 1991. Because above the well screen is called the Packer unit, and the Packer unit helps seal the well and prevent leakage, but a lot of those were made out of lead. In Michigan passed an order and outlawing the use of lead Packer elements in wells. A lot of us have wells that are older than 1991. So we also have a big risk of lead from paint and dust in older homes as well. This is the map that we developed that shows the distribution in red of all the parcels in the city that have lead. As you can tell, since this doesn't bounce off the screen very well, it's highly correlated to the age. Here's the age, but in red are the ages before 1950, and then where the lead pipes have been identified also corresponds roughly to that particular area. Here's a close-up. This is the near northwest side of Flint right here. And these parcels have all been identified as having a lead service connection. So what we've done, we just did this morning, we gave it to the city, is we identified 3 hotspots in the city based upon a computational routine we're able to use on our mapping system, which allows us to identify hotspots. And that'll help them locate and optimize the region outreach line.
If it's red, does that mean there's no house there?
No, if it's not red, it means it's not. It has a connection that's not lead.
Oh.
It's not lead?
It's not.
Not green is lead.
Oh,
No, that is lead. That is lead.
Yeah.
Green is other or unknown. It might be. Now, what we've estimated, now the number we came up with exactly was 4,376 lead service line connections in the city. We've estimated another 4,000 are likely to be lead just based upon the age of the homes and the occupation choices that we have. I think that's a fairly conservative estimate. Remember, there's 15,000 homes in the city that are older than 1930. We're taking about a third of that, or a quarter of that, and just adding it on to our original total. So we're making a conservative estimate.
This is just a small portion of the city.
Yes, this is right here. Here's the park you see in green right there. We zoomed in on that area. There's that park.
Where are the other 2?
The other 2 hotspots?
Yeah.
Right below it. Right here.
Yeah.
And then we had one on the nearest side right here as well. Okay. Environmentally, lead can be found in a lot of different places. In paint, in toys. There's still a lot of toys that are painted with lead paint that children put in their mouth. Water, pottery. There's a tradition of Mexican pottery using lead in the mix, and it's fired it up. Brass fixtures, electrical devices, and wells also contain lead. So, where do we go from here? We really have a thorny problem. It's really a disaster. And right now, a lot of people are focusing on water, but we may have an opportunity here to think a little bit more broadly. Perhaps solve some of our lingering infrastructure issues we've had in this country for a long period of time. And certainly, as the American Society of Civil Engineers points out, we need to address these things right now. So, when we think about a network, when we think about a water network, we think about the components of that system, including the water infrastructure, the supply source, treatment facility, distribution pipes, valves, pumps, and then all the humans involved with working on that system, the water professionals, support staff, and the consumers. That's a water network, a water infrastructure network. Now, if we want to network in and change the verb a little bit, change from a noun to a verb, is that how can we upgrade water infrastructure and make them beneficial to other types of infrastructure and vice versa? So, I put together a little table. I've taken 5 of the infrastructure categories from the American Society of Civil Engineers, and I've just put them into rows and columns. And then along where they meet each other, there's next. But where they intersect with a different one, I've indicated a 0 for no connection and 1 meaning there is a connection, meaning there might be an opportunity to look for strategies that can help us address multiple problems at one time. So let's intersect energy and drinking water. Right now, we know that most systems in the United States, older systems, lose about 10 to 50% of the water they distribute. And we know this from water audits, because water utilities will measure the amount of water that they put out to consumers, and then they'll measure the amount of total water that is used at the water meter on the customer end, and typically there's a 10 to 15% difference between those. So somewhere along the way, 50% of the 10 to 15% of the water is leaking out. Now, a system where you've got leaking pipes and you've got pipe ruptures every day, It's not hard to imagine how that happens. So we have 10 to 15% water leaking out. That's indicative of pipe corrosion, which results in more energy required for pumping the water. That's what happens when metal corrodes. It forms tubercules inside the pipe. It makes the pipe rougher, and as a result, the pumps have to work harder. So your energy costs as a utility go up. And for a utility, energy costs can represent 20 to 60% of their total cost of treating water. So we do water audits in terms of methods. We can do acoustical link detection to find out where certain pipes are leaking. That actually involves sinking the microphones into the ground and listening. That also involves hooking up what we call leak detectors at fire hydrants at the end of pipes, and then a mathematical formula can indicate by the waves that are transmitted to each of those terminals where the leak is in the pipe. And this can reduce energy use, lower water rates, reduce contamination risk. Also improve residence time, decrease residence time. Flint has an astronomical residence time for a water distribution system, meaning the water stays in the pipes for a long period of time, and that creates more risk. The longer the water's in the pipe, the more it can pick up contamination. Some Flint water is in the pipe up to 6 days in certain parts of the system. It shouldn't be in the pipe longer than 36 hours.
Probably much higher now because they're not using it.
That could be too. Now, I'd like to get Terry's 1 to 6 multiplier. The multiplier I came up with from Moody's Investor Service that every dollar spent on infrastructure yields about $1.59 in gross domestic product. We get lower healthcare costs, lower energy costs in the utility, and less greenhouse gas emissions. So let's do one more.
That would be an example, and then I'll open it up for questions. So let's just look at the relationship between drinking water and people's homes. We have a 1 there in that column. So, older homes with lead service lines are more likely to contain lead paint and be located in areas of high lead risk. This combination leads to more health problems in poor and predominantly African American neighborhoods. Method. So we want to perform a total lead assessment, not only on the pipes, but also on the indoor plumbing. And then look at the paint, look at the solder, remediate the soil, educate homeowners, make them aware. I was interviewed a few months ago by a plumbing trade magazine, and they asked me, what can plumbers do when they enter a home? I said, keep your eyes open. Look for sources of lead and tell the homeowner that this solder is suspect. It needs to come out. So for every dollar we spend on lead abatement, there is a $17 to $221 benefit. Lower healthcare costs, increased productivity. Again, if you're reducing people's mental capacity on a large scale, you're killing your economy. Greater tax receipts, lower education costs, reductions in crime. Any questions? Yes.
In the midst of what you're talking about here, we had these lessons in the construction, we had to get lead paint. My question to you would be, we know that we had the water problem because of the way they service the water when they switched. But what you're talking about is infrastructure. So are they going to go in and redo everybody's houses and replumb structure as you're talking here? Or just make it so the water they're delivering isn't of...
I think it's the latter. I think what's going to happen, I think what their intention is to make the water safe immediately. Now, I want to talk about one thing that Carrie said. She said that you have to go over and above the normal testing in order to regain trust in the community. Now, I'll give you an example. Milwaukee, in 1993, had the major contamination event we've ever seen in this country. That they had an outbreak of cryptosporidium, which is a protozoan pathogen which infected their water supply. It caused 400,000 people to get sick, 69 people died. Now talk about losing confidence in your water supply. That was it. So what did they do? Well, they followed almost exactly what Terry suggested. They changed their source of supply. They had been getting water from Lake Michigan near the shore, and a lot of the near shoreline runoff was coming in, and some of the animals are the source of Cryptosporidium, and it was the near shore source that led to that contamination on the intake. So they moved their intakes 2 miles further out into Lake Michigan. Then they went into the plant, and they constructed filters that were smaller, that had a smaller space and size than the Cryptosporidium organism, to give people confidence that we're going to catch this thing. The organism is about 5 to 6 microns in size, and they use filters that are 1 micron in size. But then they went even further. Instead of just testing for the 91 required contaminants under the Safe Drinking Water Act, they tested for more. They tested for other microorganisms and pharmaceuticals. That gave people confidence in their water supply. Okay. But to answer your question, I don't want to be too much like a politician. To answer your question, I'm suggesting that it's time that this crisis offers the opportunity to perhaps link up different infrastructure remediation efforts. And if we're going to go into people's homes, and we're going to fix, and we're going to have to, in some cases, do that to fix their lead pipes, let's get all the lead out. Okay? Now, they may not do that. It's expensive. I mean, it's going to be a tremendous expense.
Just the rehabbing the lead paint's going to cost you a fortune. If you're
Right, it's
going
going
to
to
talk
cost
about all of
$8,000 to
it.
$15,000 per house. But there's payback. Yes.
Yes, there is a payback, but I guess it depends on how you structure it, because honestly, the person who spends the money doesn't always reap the benefits. And so I think there needs to be that discussion about, if you're going to, as a homeowner, invest in that, say for a rental property or whatever, as you might see in Flint, then there has to be some connection between the two.
Right.
My understanding that the Flint water thing was using the Flint River as the water source was supposed to be a temporary measure until they connected to the new water system. What issues are likely to be there? I mean, one of the things that were discussed between both of the presentations was the need for qualified staff to operate the plant. Unless they're using Detroit water, they're going to have somebody is going to have, the water authority is going to have that responsibility. And I guess I'm not sure that Michigan requires water operators to be licensed. Numbers of states do.
There's certification training.
There is.
They have to go through certification.
Right. I mean, do we have availability of those people, or is there a...
That is true, but I think I'm talking about sort of a higher level, more of an engineering. Many of the operators are not engineers. They go through the certification training, but it's not. If you ask them about lead chemistry, I don't think they could tell.
I guess let me boil it all down to this. Is the city of Flint residents, what is their risk that if they do get switched to this new water source, that they might not take a step back from where they're at today?
Well, first off, even when you change, Detroit's system has 3 intakes. Right. 2 are from the upper Detroit River, and the 3rd one is from Lake Huron. When Flint was on the Detroit system, they were getting it from Lake Huron. Okay? Going back now, or moving forward, going to the Karen Gandhi Water District, they'll be getting it from Lake Huron again. Doesn't mean it'll be the same chemistry, though. It may be from a different location within the lake. It will have to work out that, they will have to account for that. And there's going to be concern among residents about that switch.
The big difference is that they'll be treating that water, not
Right. And they need to be qualified. Yes?
What about the business that the corrosion, the lead strip or this new water took off the protective stuff that had been developed over the years? Are people talking about putting back in the corrosion protection stuff to build that back up? And is that the fastest way for the whole community? Or are we going into the business of doing like Lansing did, replacing all those lead lines?
It's both. One is that anti-corrosion inhibitors have begun to be added to Flint water. And again, since they're back onto the Detroit system, Detroit uses corrosion control. Okay? So they're thinking that is going to help rebuild that protective layer in some cases. However, you have a situation, as Terry mentioned, and I mentioned too, you have a community that's lost faith in their water supply. And they identify lead as being that problem. So there's a massive, massive public opinion to get rid of the lead in the system. And you can see that, embodied in the mayor, who is very, very strongly advocating getting rid of all the lead lines in the city. And I would support that too, from a professional, and knowing what I know about hazards and handling hazards in the past, is that if we don't, we need to do that in order to regain trust of the community in the water supply.
How much would it cost if they wouldn't have been a little chintzy and would have added that, and where would we be now if they had just spent a couple $1 million and put that additive in, we wouldn't be talking about this?
Well, Terry showed us, what, $140 a day about?
That was one.
For the city?
Yeah.
For $140 a day, we're talking about millions and billions here now? Who gets their pip? Welcome to a governing factor. $140 a day would have saved all this. Somebody needs to... Kids go to jail for a joint. This is worse than a joint.
I have to say that it's not clear that the corrosion inhibitor by itself makes the water was degraded. That's never been demonstrated. That just adding that would have solved the problem, but certainly it wouldn't hurt.
How many other communities besides Flint could be affected by this problem?
Potentially, the American Water Works Association and the EPA conducted national surveys, none of them recently, but within the last 20 years, that indicate that 7 to 10 million lead lines still exist in the United States.
Do we know where they exist?
Not exactly.
How do you dispose of the lead lines? What happens? Is there a toxic waste dump somewhere that makes all the lead lines, or what?
Yeah, they'll have to be sanitary landfill, no doubt. Now, they might be able to be melted down and used in another chemical where they don't pose a problem and be recycled.
So if my home tested at 22, the water, so way over the 15. So if we're testing the water, and then certain homes are coming back that they don't have a problem, and then there's going to be all of these changes that are going to be made in the water treatment system or the distribution system itself, won't that interrupt the previous lead counts in certain homes? In other words, disturbing the system, I would think, right, would disturb the distribution of water in all the pipes, or the whole system, right? Am I?
Well, you're right about that, because what happens is it's required under the lead and copper rule that when you do remove a lead service line, you have to take a water test within 72 hours to make sure that the disturbance that you did create by removing the pipe hasn't stirred up more lead in doing that.
So why are we going through the process of testing our water? I'm sorry, that's crazy. Don't worry.
You talked about how you found the lead lines by a process of going to the city and getting some records and so on. Does that process exist in most communities? I mean, would you have to do the same thing? If we wanted to find, well, Board of Water and Light has done that here. Other places, you have to do that same thing. And when you sell your house, do you have to say that you have a lead line?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you know it. If you know it. It's under the disclosure rules. But I just talked to the Green Bay Public Utility yesterday, and I asked them, because they have a lead line map as well. There's only a few places around the country that seem to have mapped out lead lines like we have in Flint. And I asked them, where did you get your information from? They said, well, we had records that when the pipes were installed, we actually, and then computerized them. Flint never got around to computerizing the records. So unfortunately, a lot of them degraded because they're written in pencil on 3x5. Now, most utilities have a set maintenance schedule where they'll do a rotating amount of maintenance every year on a certain percentage of their pipes. So they'll go through on their service lines and on their sewers and do maybe 10 to 12% a year. And then they'll make records of what they see. So if those records are kept and they're up to date and they're older than 10 years, then they're going to have fairly complete records of what's there. And that's what happened in Green Bay. They didn't know what was there. Flint, we don't. Yes?
So how many children are affected by this lead poisoning?
There's 9,000 children between age 0 and 6 in Flint.
And how are these children going to be educated if they're severely emotionally disabled because of the lead poisoning? Who's going to fund this program?
Yes.
There's nothing helping these children right now at this moment. Even if we have any possible risk, is there anything that, I mean, I know some strategies that we have, but is there anything that we're thinking of as a government that's helping these children in the near future?
Well, nutrition is very important because certain nutrients such as vitamin C and calcium and iron can help retard the effects and prevent the progression of symptoms of lead poisoning. They don't remove the lead from the body. Lead's a neurotoxin. It's there. It's going, and those children will probably be affected for their whole lives. But to minimize the damage and contain it, diet is a very important intervention to do very early. And there has been some federal money that's been given, right, and I believe some state money that has been given for nutrition and for counseling to do that.
And we're promoting a lot of this in Flint right now?
Oh, yes. Yes.
You speak to 9,000 children. You seem to imply it will be affected. Isn't it potentially could be affected?
Yeah, that was the answer.
Yeah. I mean, as a kid, I handled a lot of lead toys. Grew up in a house with lead paint. Even in my adult life, I had lead materials in my shop. I don't think I was affected. So, I mean, some get away with it, right?
Yeah, well, it depends on the age. It's halfway of exposure.
Depends on how hungry you are. If you're gnawing on the windowsills or the furniture because you're hungry, and there's blood in the paint there.
Excuse me.
Well, I want to thank our two speakers today. Not only was it excellent information, but it was also very reaffirming of the knowledge is power in this case, and us being able to move forward and help Flint regrow. I have tokens of appreciation for both of you, and they are Wolverine Caucus lapel pins, which I hope you will wear with pride. Wanted to ask everyone who's here if you would sign in if you didn't get a chance to before you leave today. And also, I have articles from the University of Michigan Flint Campus Geographic Information Systems Center that note a lot of what Dr. Caucus is doing on the pipeline. So please take these with you. They're on the back table as you're leaving. I think you'll find them very interesting. And then we look forward to seeing all of you again in just a few weeks on Tuesday, April 19th, when we'll be talking about autonomous vehicles. Those driverless cars that will soon be on our roads. So I thank all of you for coming. I thank all of the legislators who joined us today, all of the dignitaries who were here. And let's all continue to try to help Flint move forward. We'll see you in April, and go blue.
I do.
No, I'm
Yeah.